like to welcome you to the place. This is the place for intellectual, spiritual, and scriptural honesty. And tonight we are pleased to have this awesome guest. His name is Agustin Astacio. And I'm not going to hesitate in bringing him in. I think that we have a lot to talk about. Honey, what do you think about Augustin's performance the other night on Inspiring Honesty?
Well, I thought it was just that. I thought he was very honest and relatable to the crowd, and I know tonight he'll be the same way. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of his journey. And I think we're all on this journey, and we're never at a stopping place. And without further ado, I think we should get Augustin on.
I completely concur. We welcome you, Agustin.
Good evening.
And
I'm calling in from Marbury, Maryland, which is close to Washington, D.C.
okay. And I think that lots of people who are listening tonight actually listened to the show that you were on, Inspiring Honesty, and they so enjoyed your honesty, so enjoyed your manner. You're very, very kind, and we are so pleased to have you on tonight. Can you give us a little bit of background about you, in the sense of how this all started for you? You're an ex-Jehovah's Witness, if I'm not mistaken, and so could you go back and just give us a little bit of history about your story?
Well, I'm a third generation ex-Jehovah's Witness, which means that my grandparents were the first converts to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I believe it was in the early 50s, possibly even late 1940s. And my grandfather was a nominal Roman Catholic who lived in Brooklyn, New York, and he gambled there on the streets of Brooklyn. And in Brooklyn, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, which is a corporate name for the Jehovah's Witnesses, owns 10 blocks of Columbia Heights in Brooklyn, which right now they're actually trying to sell all of their properties there and move upstate. But so he was gambling on the streets of Brooklyn, and what we call Bethelites. Bethelites are those that work at the headquarters. The headquarters is also called Bethel, which of course means house of God, taken from where the Bible story of Jacob wrestling God on the rock, which was called Bethel. So the Bethelites, they commute, and he was gambling, and they threw the magazines right on top of his dice. So the rest was history after that. All of my aunts, uncles were Jehovah's Witness elders. All of my cousins are Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother was the black sheep of the family. Out of 8 siblings, she left the Jehovah's Witnesses when she was young. Met my father. Was heavily involved in drug addiction, and so we grew up in a house where both my parents were drug addicts. And in New York, and my father, of course, wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, an irreligious man at the time, and they moved eventually to New York in the Reagan years, when Reagan was doing a massive hiring. And she got a job here in the government and moved us out of New York. She wanted a better life for her kids, me and my sister. And so we moved out here to Washington, D.C., and she got back in touch with her JW roots. And it was through her returning to her Jehovah's Witness roots that, of course, I was raised in that philosophy, that religious ideology. Even when we were in New York, she always talked to us about Jehovah God. And so I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, I got baptized at age 14. Was very zealous. Was a what they call a continuous auxiliary pioneer, which means that you dedicate a number of hours to knocking on people's doors a month, and I was doing about 60 hours a month. And got married in the Kingdom Hall, which is a huge privilege. It means you're a Jehovah's Witness in good standing when you get married in the Kingdom Hall to my wife, and she was a Jehovah's Witness, of course. They only marry within the faith. They are told not to associate with those outside of the faith, except for where it is necessary. Like if you have to work with someone, you have to work with them, but you wouldn't go out to eat or drink with them or something like that. Any kind of social functions, and so they are a strictly communal group without actually living in a compound. And of course, there are those that are not as obedient to the rules, but for the most part, those ones are very devout and very obedient and very controlled. And so they have this apocalyptic fear of the end. It's a highly apocalyptic group. They've set dates for the end of the world 9 times in 139 years of existence. So they're heavily fear-induced through apocalyptic prophecies that they believe the end is coming or is nigh. And so I grew up with the idea that I would never grow up in this world or this system, and that I would walk into a paradise earth because of being faithful to God's organization. And they view themselves as the only true organization. And so after when I got married to my wife, the founding of the internet, I got a government job. My wife was working in the government. She got me in the government. And I did searches on the internet, and there were all of these sites by ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're not supposed to interact with an ex-Jehovah's Witness. They're called apostates. And the word apostasy means to turn from, to a rejection of the faith. And so apostates are probably the worst people you can come up against. They are the equivalent of Satan himself. And what the internet has given a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses the anonymity to encounter ex-Jehovah's Witnesses without the fear of discipline, which they will receive because no one, they remain anonymous. And so I think that the internet has been a huge vehicle for reaching out to Jehovah's Witnesses, and many of them do break the rules, and they break the rules for the same reasons that I did, and that was you feel that you can defend the organization's doctrinal structure, its beliefs. You could vindicate Jehovah's name by encountering the enemy, firsthand. And of course, even though the Watchtower Society continuously tells Jehovah's Witnesses they should not engage the enemy, Jehovah's Witnesses do, and I did. And I felt that whatever I could hear, if I have the truth, if I have light, then it should dispel the darkness. So I encountered the enemy, and I had a lot of excuses for many of the teachings of the false prophecies. But one of the things is that most people have this idea that Jehovah's Witnesses are very adept at their Bible. And that's very deceiving, actually. They're not adept at their Bible. They're adept at the presentations that they're given to give. And they spend a lot of time learning how to present their doctrinal structure with their Bibles. And so they're very, very good at using proof texts to mislead people and to read their own doctrines into the Bible, and so they practice. They have actual meetings called one during the week is called Theocratic Ministry School, where they practice on stage. They give a presentation of how they would engage people at the doors, and how to tackle the issues and questions that they would come up with. And they have certain guidebooks that they carry with them that also help them out. So I was a very active Jehovah's Witness, and started reading the Bible on my own. And what I really did, I think, what really they had some doctrinal changes that caused me to doubt, and I got an interlinear, Greek interlinear, and realized that they had changed scores and scores of the text of Scripture. Yeah, I didn't know any Greek, but it's pretty easy to use if you just read the English underneath the Greek. That is the word-for-word English translation, and compare it to the actual translation on the right. You can see where there's obvious discrepancies and changes that are made. And then I compared it with other translations. I bought books like A Translation Bibles to compare the differences, and had a dramatic conversion. I remember telling my wife, I'd read, there's actually a book by a former governing body member of the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's called Crisis of Conscience. And Raymond Franz, who passed away 3 years ago, this is going to be his 4th year anniversary this June, wrote these two books, but I think the book Crisis of Conscience had the biggest impact. And it's basically about, mostly about what happened in 1980 at the Watchtower headquarters. They had a huge shakeup, and what were the causes of the shakeup, and also it gives you a good look into the governing authority structure of the governing body and how they made the decisions and some of the mistakes that they had made even, and so Ray gives a introspective look into that, and that was one of the books that was very pivotal in my exit.
I find that your story is extremely interesting. Would you mind me probing a bit?
Sure, Joe. Go ahead.
When you say that you had this conversion experience and you looked at this interlinear, I actually own one of the first diaglots. It was given to me by a group of Jehovah's Witnesses that I met with on a regular basis for almost a year. I had a facility that they would meet at. It had no label on it, and it was a very neutral place to meet, and there was about between 25 to 35 Jehovah's Witnesses who would actually meet with me, and that only became something that happened because I'm a linguist, and when they brought to me one of their diglots and said, see, this Greek says this, I looked at it and I shook my head and I said that this is extremely poor. And they said, what are you talking about? The English is up underneath the Greek. And I said, one of the things that you can't do with the Greek text, there's no such thing as a word-for-word translation, number one, because Greek and English are not equivalent. And so that developed a little bit of curiosity right there. And so instantly they were interested in my spin, if you will, on John 1:1. And so I said, okay, let me look at your book. And they have a particular text base that they use. They're very much with Westcott and Hort. And also you do have Griesbach. And so I picked it up and I simply looked at it and I said, well, it's not hard to read. I said, NRK en halagos, kai lagos en prostantheon, kai theos en halagos. And they said, oh, you can read. And I said, yes. And then I started asking questions, can you? And all of them said no, and I simply asked them the question, do you realize who actually translated or gave these words underneath these terms? And they said, oh yeah, I know who this person is, Mr. Wilson, Benjamin Wilson. And if I'm not mistaken, and I stand to be corrected because you have so much experience here and I have little to none, but did not the Watchtower Society or the Jehovah's Witnesses actually, did they not acquire this particular interlinear at one particular time?
Yeah, it's the dialogue is actually a work of the Christadelphians. Wilson was a Christadelphian.
Right. He was actually Church of God of the Abrahamic faith, to be
Right.
technical, correct?
Right. And, the witnesses don't use the dialogue anymore. You may have encountered some Bible students. Now, the Bible students are a split from the Watchtower Society. In 1914, probably about 1917, there was a definitive split amongst the leadership then of the Watchtower Society when the origin, the founder, Charles Taze Russell, passed away. He passed away on a train, actually October 31st, 1915, I believe. He passed away, and he willed his estate, his corporation, to 7 directors. And on the second set in the will was Joseph Rutherford, and he was a lawyer. And what he managed to do was to get 4 of those directors to sign over their rights. And so he had a majority of the directors out of the 7 sign over the rights of the corporation towards him. And so there was a split, kind of like you have your fundamentalist Mormon church, the FLDS, and then you have the LDS church. The fundamentalist branch are the ones that still continue to closely adhere to Joseph Smith's teachings, while the current one in Utah, Salt Lake City, is actually grounded upon Brigham Young. So the Jehovah's Witnesses took a split. The 3 directors continued the legacy of Pastor Russell and his teachings, and they still use the dialogue. And Pastor Russell's Studies in the Scriptures volumes, while current Jehovah's Witnesses, which outgrew the International Bible Student Association, which was their former name, they outgrew them, and they now printed their own interlinear, which, you're correct, is a Westcott and Morse text. That's all it is, a Westcott and Morse text that they just stamped their name to and declared as Greek interlinear that they would use. But they were using the dialogue until they created the interlinear as their primary Greek text, and it wasn't something that was readily in use. Most Jehovah's Witnesses have no idea how to use an interlinear or what it's for.
Right. I do have in my hand the volume that you're talking about, this Kingdom Interlinear translation of the Greek Scripture. One of the things that I did with these people, I actually said, let me, for the sake of argument, let me call actually New York, and let's talk to someone who is involved in the committee, that is translation committee, and did so. It took quite some time, various months went by before I could actually have some dialogue. But the discussion started because the pamphlets suggest that in John chapter 1, it's all about a God instead of just God. And their argument is, well, you do not have the definite article. And the Protestants and the Catholics have been pontificating that the idea is that when you read this last part of, let's call it chapter 1, verse 1c, when you read theos and halagos, that the term theos is a predicate nominative and it does not have the definite article.
Right.
And so the Protestants are very, very, very pro quoting Caldwell's ruling. Now, Dr.
Right.
Caldwell, in my opinion, was a failed scholar. And the reason that I state that he was a failed scholar, he really didn't pick up on the scholarship of Dr. Dana. Now, Dr. Dana proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that any time that we get into case function and get case sensitive and think that function indicates or cases indicate the function and therefore we should render it accordingly, that would be a spurious mindset. And the same thing would be true with the article. My point being, the Greek has an article. It's neither indefinite or definite. It's simply called the article. And it has been actually manipulated into the definite article. For instance, for most of you guys who are viewing tonight, when you look at the Greek doesn't have an indefinite article. And when you read every English Bible, the best thing that you could do is to take out every indefinite article, because the indefinite article makes no sense to a Greek-speaking person, that is, of the first century. They didn't have it, and even in the modern age, we really don't have anything close to it. The only thing that we have close to it would be an indefinite pronoun called tis. And so this would be a demonstrative most of the time, and it's not always indefinite. So that's the closest thing that Greek even has to it. To make my point, the arguments have been going back and forth from the Watchtower Society to several Protestants like Dr. Walter Martin, and I'm sure you're familiar with that gentleman in times past.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it seems like every show was about pontificating the dogma that would actually fight or combat the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I guess my point was, when I got on the phone with him, I simply said, listen, I agree with you that Dr. Caldwell's rule only dealt with about 40% of the predicate nominatives that preceded the acquative verb. I concur with that. And so it's nonsense to suggest that something is articular if it does precede in all cases, if the evidence doesn't demonstrate it. And simply because you have a predicate nominative there that precedes the acquative doesn't speak at all about it being indefinite or definite either way. But I said my question has to do with the chi conjunction, because any time that you do have theon chi theos, you have the accusative with the chi connection with the predicate nominative. And the only reason that you have halagos, the article in Greek here, ha before logos, has to do with this is simply a subject indicator. And so I simply started asking questions. The only reason that John wrote this way or in this manner was to actually say this is actually the subject. And the reason that he put the term theos with the chi conjunction was to make the predicate nominative and emphatic. In other words, it's true that every linguist that's dealing with the reconstruction of the Greek today will admit that if you read John 1:1, this is to be taken as emphatically what theon is emphatically what theos is. And I don't know of a linguist that would actually make a ruling against that, because it would be nonsense. So this is the way that I was speaking to the Jehovah's Witnesses back then. And it didn't make sense to them. And I found that they were very disingenuous when it came to the basics of even the definite article, much less the rest of the text. And so I wanted your opinion about why are they so disingenuous with the Greek text and with their English text? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, like I said, the problem is that they want to read their doctrine into the text as opposed to allowing the text to speak for itself. They don't really care for exegeting the text. They care for eisegeting the text.
Right.
So, but most Jehovah's Witnesses that you encounter are only parroting what they've been told. They have no idea of Greek grammar or its construction. They have no interest in the grammar. they don't have the interest in that. They remain mostly poorly educated, and that they rely upon the interpretations of what comes out of Brooklyn Bethel. And so they feel that these men were divinely appointed, and actually just recently they've made that, they've emphasized that even more in the recent Watchtower meeting. They had an annual meeting, and now the governing body, which used to define all heavenly calling Jehovah's Witnesses as the faithful and the sweet slave of Matthew 24, now have basically said that Matthew 24, the faithful and the sweet slave, so only applies to those 10 individuals that are governing over in Brooklyn Bethel. So, you know, they have controlled the masses of Jehovah's Witnesses. They've kept them uneducated. Jehovah's Witnesses do not pursue college careers. They're told not to pursue a college career. And so it's a very Orwellian world that the Jehovah's Witnesses are in. And those who know anything about George Orwell in 1984, his book 1984 and film, subsequent film, they're quick to identify that when you have an authoritarian structure, you have a leadership that wants to control its masses, does so by, first of all, keeping them uneducated, and then keeping them occupied in a war that doesn't exist, which is what Orwell was all about in 1984. And this war is a spiritual war for Jehovah's Witnesses. And so they're kept busy with constant indoctrination and constant activity, and told not to question, and not to think, and not to pursue intellectualism. And as a result, most are only parroting that same things that they have been funneled through, and they're not being purposely disingenuous, that is the laity, but there's no doubt that the leadership believes its own hype and is willing to do anything to convince themselves of that own hype. And so the only thing I could say about Jehovah's Witnesses, including their leadership, because I think that they actually believe their disingenuous tactics, is there is a huge realm of cognitive dissonance amongst the cults, and the Jehovah's Witnesses more so. And so it's very, very easy for the leadership to do something disingenuously and believe that it is not disingenuous at the same time. That somehow God has guided them to do that. And this comes out in their literature. In fact, in their Watchtower literature, and this is a paraphrase, but I can definitely trace it down to anyone who would ask of me. I have it in my CD-ROM library. They said, a lie as told by the devil is just as truth. So they believe that even a lie that is told by the devil, if it's the truth, it's truthful. So that they believe that you can disingenuously lie in court, and yet it's truthful because you're doing it in the name of God. And that's the philosophy that maintains every Jehovah's Witness. And what they're doing is that this us versus them mentality. And I spoke about this in Inspiring Honesty. This us versus them mentality. Everyone outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses is the world. They're controlled by the devil, and they're not to be trusted. And so we can lie to the world. We can do anything it takes to make sure that our name is preserved, and that follows through in all types of activities, which even are criminal, like hiding pedophiles or demanding that their people refuse blood transfusions and allowing them to die, including their children, over a foolish doctrine which they don't even believe anymore.
Right. Agustin, I was reading, and it's strange that you brought that up about the lying. I read that just this afternoon, and it had many different excerpts from the Watchtower Society and their magazines, and it said, just like you said, lying is fine as long as it will bring about a greater good, for the Jehovah Witness. Yeah, and I was just blown away. And also concerning blood transfusions, it seems like they're getting away from it. They're trying to almost split some hairs. I thought because if the blood is watered down, it's a little bit okay, or if it's your own blood and you've stored it, it's fine. But they really go back to a lot of obviously Old Testament verses that were certainly not meant for contemporary people, concerning blood and not having blood to enter your body, or to eat blood, and so I don't have a big background in linguistics, but I do have two questions for you. This might be a hard one. I'm curious as to why that the kingdom halls do not have any windows. Is there a reason, or is it just for aesthetics?
I also think that this is a part of mind control also. I think so also. Well, I mean, first of all, Jehovah's Witnesses, when they started as a group, and Bible students, Russell, they rented Masonic halls, and most Masonic halls are windowless because Freemasonry is largely a secret society. And so their buildings were structured in the sense so that, the outside world cannot look in and see what they were doing. And so I think that part of that has continued to exist in the fact that they are a secret society. And so most of their structures have either very, very small or no windows. And the other part is that it's subliminal. Jehovah's Witnesses then can't look outside. They have to pay attention to what's happening inside. All of these things are, I think, covert, subliminal ways of control. And so something as simple as windowless kingdom halls, I think is just another very subliminal means of controlling those that are, the common Jehovah's Witness faith.
That makes a lot of sense. And also from your show that you were on, Inspiring Honesty, you mentioned that whenever you came out of the Jehovah Witnesses, that is called, people have to disfellowship you, or you were disfellowshipped.
Right.
And you mentioned, I think your wife is still a JW.
No. She was for a year after I had turned in my letter. I had disassociated myself, and what they've actually done is they used to call it, if they put you out, it was called disfellowship, and if you left, it was disassociating yourself. But because of, I guess, some legal problems, now if they put you out, now they refer to it as you have disassociated yourself, even though they are the ones that are being proactive in putting you out of the organization. They would say that, for example, if I decided that I don't believe that Jesus came back invisibly in 1914, which is one of their central doctrines,
right,
then if I said I disagree with that, then by me disagreeing with that, I would disassociate myself. And so they would hold a tribunal. They would request for me to show up, and where if I didn't recant such a view, then I would be viewed as disassociated. Now, they don't use disfellowship because I think it's produced some legal problems. And so but just by a change in terminology, it puts the impetus of the person that is disagreeing. They're trying to say that this person is responsible for they don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. They don't want to be part of our collective. And so they've disassociated themselves by their actions, as opposed to we've disfellowshipped them because they're disagreeing with our views.
Well, I was wondering about, and I guess this is a little personal, about your relationship with your wife during that interim between, when she disassociated herself and you coming out first. I know that must have been a struggle in your household. How did you handle that?
It was very difficult. Even now, when I counsel people that are leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses that are married, most if you're a married Jehovah's Witness couple, and if one of them disagrees with the doctrine or the beliefs and has been disassociated or disfellowshipped, whichever jargon they want to use, it often results in divorce. And the elders have no problem, even though their own doctrine prohibits divorce, except for the case of adultery. The elders have no problem pushing the active Jehovah's Witness member spouse to pursuing a divorce in such a case, because they feel that spouse is threatened spiritually by the other spouse. And what remained the case for me was I had good counseling from another person, and I backed off, and I attended the meetings, and for a long time before I even had that disassociation. And even though I didn't go out knocking on doors, I sporadically attended just enough so that my wife would be satisfied, and tried to keep the charade long enough to possibly win her over. But it was difficult. It was really hard. Even when my wife, followed along with me, it was still very difficult because, I lost my mother, I lost my sister, I lost my entire family as contacts. And I was, I was being shunned from my entire family. And in the beginning, it was very lonely. I remember driving, and I lived in Suitland, and my godfather lived in down where I live here near Marbury, which is about 45 minutes away. And I remember leaving home to go to church on a Sunday and crying all the way till I got to the church, and wiping my tears before I got in, and got into church and went through the worship service, and then left and crying all the way back home. And it was really, really tough, being alone. You felt like you were really alone, and no one to turn to. But I tell you, times have changed because now there's a lot more people out here to help and to counsel you and to talk to, and a lot more vehicles of contact. The internet has opened up whole communities of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses where they can discuss these things, they can encourage one another, they can debate and dialogue over what teachings that they disagree with or which ones they do agree with, and that's freedom, that's liberty, to be able to discuss these issues, and which is why I love healing so much. Our blog is a unique blog. It's an interreligious blog. We have atheists, we have agnostics, we have shamanists, we have New Agers, and we have evangelicals like myself with Catholic and Orthodox leanings.
Well, Agustin, why don't you give the people the address, and if people are watching right now, if it's not them themselves, it might be someone they know. How can they get help? How can they get counseling, or just somebody to pull up beside them and help shoulder the burden of trying to leave or thinking about leaving? Where can they go for help?
Well, I'll tell you that there's a hotline, and then we have a blog site, which is www.healingxjws.com, And on that website, there are online free books, there's videos, there's discussions, there's blogs that you can start, there's study groups there online, and we have over 400 current ex-Jehovah's Witnesses on the group in that blog site right now. Most are lurkers, and that's fine, and we don't block anyone from joining the group. As long as they're not, resorting to attacks of other members. But it's an open dialogue. It's an open forum, no matter what you believe or don't believe. And the other hotline I always give out is 1-800-Y-1914. And 1-800-Y-1914 is manned by a wonderful woman named Marilyn Zweifel. And she takes calls from all over the world. And this is a group that former governing body member Raymond Franz was a part of, and in the structure of it being as a lighthouse and outreach to Jehovah's Witnesses, no matter what they believe. And so that hotline, Marilyn is not going to, if you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, she's not going to say, oh, well, you need to believe in God or this or that, We deal with people that are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses from all different, viewpoints. And so the point is, I think, is to find healing.
Yes.
Wherever you are, wherever you're at. If you find spiritual healing in being a shamanist, then so be it. Then let you find peace in that and liberty in that viewpoint.
That's marvelous.
The thing that I was talking to you about a few minutes ago was really something that did impact me quite a bit. My mission, if you want to call it a mission, was not to convert them to what I believe. I was simply there as a linguist and wanting and desiring for all of these people that I was meeting with simply to go to school. And so my agenda was to demonstrate to them how religion plays a huge role in keeping you dumb. And I would go through the fundamentals of Greek and demonstrate why these things in the text were extremely poor, and then they started asking questions about their own Bible. And then I started dealing with the English exclusively, and what was so tragic, I wound up teaching English to these people because they had no clue as to how English actually worked. And I know that there has been much improvement in the Watchtower Society in terms of their language improvement, but it's only been because people have really asked the difficult questions to them and why they have refused educational processes for so many years. And so it's sad that the Watchtower Society, like many other organizations, and I can name many, they have simply rewritten Greek grammar for their own means, that is, for their own doctrine. The same thing is true in the Protestant church. You have people who are very respected in the Protestant church, like Daniel Wallace, who wrote the Greek grammar, Greek Beyond the Basics. And he has so many things about participles that are completely invented. It's just something that fits his system of theology. And this is something that comes out of Dallas Theological Seminary. So I really don't find that the Jehovah's Witnesses are the only ones who are being disingenuous. That is about the manuscripts of the Bible and the language, because we have grammar after grammar after grammar that has been published in the name of God. And these grammars have been written not because these language rules existed, but these language rules have been created to fit and satisfy theological doctrine and dogma. And I guess my point was with these people who I cared very much for, I simply wanted them to get the benefits of a good education, and that would take them into the arena of thought called being objective and reasonable about things. And I find that religious people are prone to these kinds of organizations like the Watchtower Society. Why do you think people are drawn to these kinds of organizations?
Well, I just think that, well, first of all, a lot of people that are attracted to the Jehovah's Witnesses are usually irreligious people that just are impressed. Those ones are very impressive at the doors. They come well dressed. Sometimes they come as whole families at your door. They seem to know their Bible well. And if you're somewhat irreligious and you have some identity with God and you say, I believe in God, in general, a generic belief in God, and these people come at your doors and they just seem so well groomed and so well mannered and impressive, you kind of look at them and you say, that's the kind of the role model of what I want to be like, what a family should be. They are very impressive at the doors. But the thing is that sometimes, first impressions don't reveal, the true identity of what's happening. The fact is that there are many broken homes in Jehovah's Witnesses. The Jehovah's Witnesses are a very misogynistic group. Women are highly mistreated. Men are very dominant. And it is a male-dominated group. And so women, their opinions, if they were to come up against the men, mean very little. And that's happened a lot, especially in the issue with pedophilia, with the Watchtower Society, which is mostly male on women or male on young girls. And so it's a misogynistic control group, and I think that it does attract a certain people. If you're the black sheep in the family, if you're somewhat of a lost soul, then this gives you family. This gives you, just like anything, like a gang. Gangs in Los Angeles capture pretty much people that are lost or single individuals that just have no family or friends or community. And so they provide you a community, even though it's a false community. Community based on what you can provide to the community. And that's the sad situation. But, the fact is that can happen anywhere. That can happen in an evangelical church.
Sure.
I've met evangelicals that have been just stubbornly, absolutely abusive and ignorant. I once bumped into a man at my father-in-law's church. My father-in-law came out of Jehovah's Witnesses, and he goes to a huge Baptist church. And this old man was actually bragging about chasing Jehovah's Witnesses off his lawn and threatening to call the police on them. And I said, how dare you? How dare you? That's not a loving way to present Christianity to these people that are actually taking time off of their schedule to come and knock on your door because they're concerned about you and your salvation and your soul. It doesn't matter whether they're wrong or right. The least you can do is actually exhibit Christianity by whether you can debunk or not debunk, by giving them, a glass of lemonade on a hot day, or, letting them, get some water or something, a kind word. So, you can find such prevailing harshness and ignorance anywhere, in any church. And so it's about treating each other as human beings. And this organization, though, I call it the ultimate party pooper religion.
Well, Agustin,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to admit, it sounds like you're not just one who left the Jehovah's Witnesses. It sounds like you're leaving most of what Christianity's been about for a long period of time, because the Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only ones that try to get us to park our minds.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm an evolving Christian. When I first, like I said, I had a dramatic conversion experience, and there's no doubt that when I began, I was somewhat of a fundamentalist Christian, left behind follower, whatever, the Tim LaHaye genre of books. As I continued to study the ancient church more, to read the early fathers, and to expand my horizons, and to study science and cosmology, I started to broaden my perspectives. Most fundamentalists would consider me, and I have been called a heretic and not a Christian, because I hold to old Earth creationism, that the Earth was not created in 7 24-hour days.
Right.
I hold to that the cosmos is billions of years old, and the evidence shows that.
Sure.
And the idea that man existed on this planet and was in a garden, and I take the Genesis account not as literal but as quasi-literal, and so I think that it's a story trying to tell us something, and we shouldn't take it absolutely literally. There are many things that really dispel the idea of young Earth creationism, but I've been called a heretic for my old Earth creationism.
Well, you're just welcome to the crowd, Agustin.
Yeah.
That's something that we're familiar with too. Let me ask you a question as someone that's sort of in the dark here and a little confused about the 144,000. Some questions I ask my husband, and some I just say I don't care or whatever. But why bother going door to door? I mean, what is the objective for an old man, a 30-year-old woman, and an 8-year-old kid? Why go to the door? What's the objective?
Well, the thing is that the Jehovah's Witness gospel is very, very appealing to the average person, because evangelical Christianity has, and I preach this actually from the pulpit in the Lutheran Church. Evangelical Christianity has emphasized heaven to its own detriment, and how they've done that is evangelical Christianity constantly, and this is a great thing. It talks about our relationship with God and having a personal relationship with Christ and God, and those are wonderful things. But they attach it to heaven, and the fact is that Jehovah's Witnesses are right about the biblical hope is not a finality in a place called heaven, but actually God put us on a planet and gave us sustained life here on this small blue marble with guardians like giant gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn to protect us for a purpose, because he wants us to be on this terrestrial planet. And so Jehovah's Witnesses are correct in that estimation. And so most people that are exposed to Christianity talks about heaven, and heaven is a vague place to the average person. It's an unfamiliar place. The depictions of heaven is largely clouds and small baby angels with little wings playing harps.
True.
And the fact is that there's a lot of things appealing about our planet. We look around, we see trees, we see beautiful homes, we see rivers, valleys, beautiful, beautiful planet. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses have appealed to a lot of people by emphasizing that God created us on this earth to be on this earth. And so the fact is that the 144,000 doctrine is a doctrine for a people that are dying and that no longer exist in the Jehovah's Witness mindset. They're somewhat on their last legs, on their last days. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses believe only 144,000 people were designated to go to heaven, which includes the 12 apostles and a certain number of people. And so what they do is when they come to the door, they emphasize earth. And that's what attracts people. It attracts people to this idea of being on the earth.
Do they teach that it would be the original 12, or minus one add Paul or Matthias, or who?
Well, of course, Judas is not going to heaven.
Oh, poor Judas. I mean, he really
He
gets a bad rap.
I guess
Yeah.
he wouldn't
But,
hang around long enough.
No pun intended.
The original 12 and all of the people that were Christians up to 1937.
Wow.
And then in 1937, God opened up the earthly hope. And that's when, actually, in 1937 was when Jehovah's Witnesses made two huge announcements. One was they changed their name from the International Bible Student Association to Jehovah's Witnesses. The second huge announcement was they put out a brochure called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. And it was called the Millions Campaign. And that's when they began preaching that now millions now living will walk into a paradise earth, will never die. They will have the opportunity in this generation, in this lifetime, to never grow old, but to walk into this new paradise system. And of course, that was prompted by the idea that, of course, God was going to bring an end, and very soon, and it was associated with dates. So
Yeah, they missed a few of those. Actually, in 1914, that's when they believed that Jesus actually came invisibly. Is that true?
yeah, well, that was their second interpretation for 1914. The first was Armageddon was supposed to happen in 1914, and Pastor Russell said that the Gentile times had ended, which meant that the day for the rules of earthly Gentiles had ceased in 1914, and therefore Jesus Christ was coming back to bring in his new kingdom, which would involve Armageddon. But they spiritualized it, kind of like how camping did, but in May of 2011. They said, "Oh well, Jesus did come back. We just didn't see him."
Right. So they had to come up with the invisible spin.
Wow.
Well, if they're not anything, they're very creative. I'll say that.
Well, it's really just to pass out invisible hopes, I guess.
We are here with Agustin, Astacio. He is an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and if you would like to ask him a question tonight, our text number is 850-572-7441. That would be 850-572-7441. We do have a comment, and the comment comes from Bob Graves. He is the unconventional pastor. He was on with you on Greg's show. Actually, Greg and Bob share a show called Inspiring Honesty also. And he says, "We love you, Gus."
Well, thank you. I love you too.
Yeah, I tell you what, you're a magnificent person. The thing that really attracts me to what you're doing is that you're not into fixed beliefs. You claim to be on this journey. You're exploring. You're interested in various kinds of perspectives. That is to be applauded. You're very pro-education. Why don't we talk about your scholarship? I think that you told me on the phone that you received a football scholarship, but you were not allowed to go to school.
Yeah, well, I had a 2-year scholarship to Syracuse, and because Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, downplay education, so I didn't pursue it. I wanted to actually go work at Watchtower headquarters in Brooklyn. That was one of my goals. But, God would have it that wouldn't happen because I met a woman named Sheila and fell in love with her and got married to her. and had two beautiful kids with her. So
That's wonderful.
That's a lot better than
That's-
working at the Watchtower Society.
sure is. Because you know what? Everyone that I hear that have gone to serve there, when they come back and they hated it there.
They probably disassociate themselves right away. Well, you know,
When you go visit the headquarters, there's this perception that these people are really happy. I think they're told to smile for tourists,
sure.
and so they're all happy. And they even have a video of the headquarters where everybody's smiling. And but everyone that I have ever known has gone to volunteer there, even for a short period of time, come back and they say they would never go back again.
Well, that's very telling, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was doing some volunteer teaching for some of these Jehovah's Witnesses who really were interested in linguistics, and they wanted to know a little bit about Greek. And so we were conducting classes, basically underground in a sense. And this one young man, he was so fired up about learning. He was 18 years old, and I'll never forget this. He told me, he said, Dr. Jones, I want to go to college. I want to go to a great university. And so I worked things out to where he could actually go, and it was going to be simple. And so I was getting ready to contact his parents, and his father walked in, found him there in class, and walked up and said, son, come here. And his son started crying. And I said, what's going on? Because I could see that here he was, 18 years of age, and his father is grabbing him by the hand, pulling him literally out of the classroom and saying, you're not going to school, you're going to New York. And it crushed my heart. I don't know why parents want to impose, their beliefs into their kids, that is, theological beliefs. I think that we need to give our kids the chance to think, be objective. It's my opinion. And give them the ability to listen to various teachers, professors, and get a solid education instead of just a bias from one individual or two individuals. And it really broke my heart, to be honest with you. And we're so proud of you because you walked out of it. and you didn't do so without a lot of pain. But you kept walking, and it seems like, and maybe I'm misreading this, but it seems like you continue to keep walking forward and discovery, and that's a major interest to you. Can you tell us why you have become so objective?
Well, I think that probably I think the largest impact when I was, I guess, a fundamentalist Christian was I was given a book called The King's Highway by King William. He was a Catholic who became a Jehovah's Witness, who went back to the Catholic Church. And the book was given to me by a co-worker of my wife's. My wife passed it on to me. And a sweet lady who, after giving us the book, and which I took a deep interest in reading the book, she passed away in a month and a half later. She was having stomach pains. She didn't know that she was dying, and when she went to the doctor, she found out she was dying. She had 2 young children she left behind. And so that really, really made it shattered my view as a fundamentalist that Catholics are not Christians. And I no longer lived on the idea of labeling people according to what belief system or organization that they have, but to let people be just based upon their own merits, their own individuality, and experiencing people. I remember those doors even opened even further because my wife works at Catholic University of America, and we went to the Associate Dean's house for Thanksgiving, and it was the most spiritual Thanksgiving I've ever had with any family. The whole family was so impressive. The children were just a really decent family, decent people, full of love God, and I was like, there's no way that because these people are Catholics, that they're not Christians. They behave as Christians. They look like Christians. They talk like Christians. I just stopped condemning people and started building bridges instead of barriers. And I think
Wow.
from that day on,
Yeah.
that's been my motto now: build bridges instead of barriers.
That's powerful. That is powerful. Let me give this number again because I want people to be able to get a hold of you, and want you guys to keep rolling the number on the screen, the lower third. The text number tonight is 850-572-7441. We are talking with Agustin Astacio. He's a magnificent individual. He's one who has been on this journey. He's come a long way. He's walked out of hell, and now he's enjoying a piece of heaven in a sense. And I applaud him. And both of us do.
Well, I want to make sure that people know that we do not hold anything against the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It may sound like we're trying to pick on them. I know Augustin's not, but I don't want us to be perceived that way either.
Well, I do want to make this clear. I'm against any, and please understand, I'm against any organization trying to keep people from being literate. If
Right.
an organization is trying to, say that, the Greek text says Mickey Mouse had a little lamb, and it doesn't, I'm not for that. I'm for good educational processes. I'm for giving people good science. And if a school is out there with poor teachers not educating our children, I'm interested in shutting it down. And so I'm very much against poor education, very much against these organizations that pontificate the idea of truth, and they are very illiterate, very ignorant.
Well, I mean, we can paint a lot of people with that big wide,
that's what I'm saying is-
atheism and fundamentalism, and I mean, I think every niche in this believing community that we call, like Augustine said, this big blue marble we all live on. Every segment has people in it that respond that way, and either ignorance because they don't know or because they don't want to know.
But there's a difference between having a handful of people who are ignorant in an organization, and then the premise of the organization is to keep people ignorant. And I think
Right.
that's what Agustin is talking about tonight. The premise of some of these organizations is to keep you narrow-minded. It's like fundamentalists. There is no fundamentalist organization that doesn't want to keep you narrow-minded, stuck in belief. They want to keep you, in a sense, brainwashed and brain dead. And this is the thing that I love about having, Greg Bray and even Troy on Inspiring Honesty tonight. Wow. I mean, we have two atheists who are so extremely genuine in actually looking at the evidence, dealing with evidence. And this is what we need for all of our children. We need people who are willing to be honest. And we find atheists wanting to get together with theists and become honest. You can't beat that.
No, but that is a small segment, like I
Well,
said, of the whole. And
I
just
agree,
like we
I
are
agree.
a small segment of another whole, Augustine is. And, my hope and our hope is, as the New Covenant group, is to bring more and more and more people to give them that broader understanding and that broader acceptance, and don't be afraid to question. Don't be afraid to speak with somebody different
Right.
than yourself.
Bring them into the conversation.
Right.
Bring them into something that would be rational, sensible, and things of that nature.
Exactly.
I completely agree with you. Augustin, we're enjoying what you're saying. You have such a wonderful heart. What do you think contributed to your ability to love so deep? Because it sounds like you have this big heart. It's so big. Tell us about it.
Well, I'll tell you, the older you get, you start to see things differently.
Yeah.
You don't think like a young man anymore. I think that the more people I've encountered in my life, and I just see, I see the love of God expressed in people. It's even in my daughter who loves insects, little small insects, and she wants to be an entomologist one day, and she's amazed by the insect world. She captured a praying mantis at church and kept it, and it spun an egg, and she has an egg, and she's had several eggs before it hatched. And I remember when she had just a little bug died, right, a beetle, and she wept, she cried for this beetle, and I said, you know what? It really opened my mind to how much that it is a God that God loves intensely, his entire creation, not just certain people, but his entire creation, even the insects, even the animals. He created all of these things for our enjoyment, and also for us to enjoy and for them to enjoy us. My daughter is like the Dr. Doolittle of the insect world.
Oh.
She's an amazing person, and these insects respond to her, and we're just amazed at how they respond to her, and almost as if they know she cares.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just moved beyond, even beyond the fundamentalist idea that other creatures like animals and insects don't have souls. To me, it's just, and if a God created these things, he created microscopic creatures. This is a huge God, created the smallest living organisms. Don't you think he cares about those living organisms? Something microscopic to him is gigantic in his idea of life. And so the older I get, I realize that God is a God who loves omnibenevolently. And he cares for all of us. And so if he cares for all of us, then we should care enough for each other that we shouldn't demonize one another. We should be open to dialogue, open to allow freedom to think. And Stephen Hassan has a great book. I don't know if you've heard of Stephen Hassan, but it's called Freedom of the Mind. And he's a cult expert, and I think he has a website called StephenHassan.com or .org. But he's not. I don't think he's a Christian, but he was, I think, a former Scientologist. And that's the idea, is that we are a vast people, and we are a diverse people, and so we should have the freedom to listen to one another and learn from one another.
Well, Agustin, I think sometimes we are so quick to label organizations that we do not agree with or have a lot of in common with as cults. What would you say, for instance, my mother's family in Virginia, they are Seventh-day Adventist, and they have some beliefs that I don't obviously adhere to, I don't agree with. I think they're out of this world, but I don't know of any more loving people than these people are, even though it's almost a paradox, because they're so into the old covenant, but they're the most loving people. What do you think constitutes a cult?
Well, And it's ironic that you brought out the Adventists because the Jehovah's Witnesses are actually an Adventist schism. Um, Charles Taze Russell gathered a lot of his ideology from the Adventists, and they got it from a man named William Miller, who was a Seventh-day Baptist. What identifies a cult, and so a lot of people are just, and Stephen Hassan actually goes through some of the identifications of what a cult is. He has a book called Combating Cult Mind Control, I think that's the name of the book. But, and he also has Freedom of the Mind. These are 3 books that he's written. But a cult, you have, of course, the religious identification of a cult that is a schism from another group. So Christianity would be a Judeo cult from that strict definition. But the cult, I think, has to include other elements. Sociological manipulation and psychological manipulation. And cults are usually restricted sociologically. That is that you can only stay within the group. You have some extremes in that. For example, you have communal cult, like the Branch Davidians or Jim Jones,
Sure.
or the Heaven's Gate cult, which went and existed in a compound and cut themselves completely off from society. But you don't even have to do that. Jehovah's Witnesses are one step from being a communal cult,
Right.
without actually living in a compound. And so sociological manipulation, restricting the group from socializing with other elements of society. And then there's psychological manipulation. And psychological manipulation can come from not only restricting the group from socializing with other elements, but controlling the group in such aspects as, for example, education, demonizing sources, demonizing ex-members, so many ways, saying that you can only read the information or data provided from that group, and that group's information is only viable. And so cults operate in very controlled facets. And ironically, any religious church or group that claims to be the only truth that restricts truth to that group are exhibiting facets of cultism. Any church or group that says that you shouldn't examine or explore your own belief system are exhibiting facets of cultism. In fact, Christianity intrinsically teaches that we should examine our own beliefs, that we should test ourselves. And so that involves engaging others. And that involves reading source material from others. And so that's why sometimes even the fundamentalist or evangelical circles can operate as cults.
Well, I guess I'm telling on ourselves. We've had some, I'm trying to think of a good word to call the people, those that are not up on, I guess, what a cult is, what the, germane definition is. But they've actually tried to label us as the New Covenant group as a cult. And we are so far from, your definition or the definition that, cult experts would give, because we encourage people to please get an education, please go out there and read everything you can. We invite, atheists to host shows. We invite, matter of fact, you were on a show that an atheist hosted along with Bob Graves. But, we invite everyone to this table of discussion.
Right.
And it's laughable, really, for us to hear people say that. And I think that we throw that word around, and I hope that I'm not, guilty that way too, to say, oh, they're a cult. And I have been in the past, coming out of a Baptist denomination. They are so fixated on anyone almost opposed to them as being a cult. And I remember one time, this has nothing to do with what I just said, but I thought of it as you were talking about Catholics. A friend of mine, her mother died when she was young, and she was Catholic. And as a good Baptist, I proceeded to tell my friend that her mother just would not see her in heaven. I mean, why in the world would I do that? But I really just, busted it out on her and said, your mom is, she's Catholic. She's got to be in hell. It's horrible. I know. I feel bad. And she started crying and carrying on and ran to the preacher and told on me and stuff. And so that was one of the last times I ever did that. Obviously, I don't believe that now, thank God. But to think, arrogance is a word that was used in Inspiring Honesty tonight. And to think that, I was so arrogant to think that what I believed and what I had and where I was going to church was it. It's shameful. And I think we ought to be ashamed sometimes of where we came from. And I know you say third generation. A lot of times we do our children a disservice, like my husband was saying. We bring them up in something that, we really firmly believe in, and whether it's good faith or not, we don't give them the opportunity to grow beyond, the crib as a metaphor. And I'm so thankful that we are trying to get people out of that rut. And by the way, tomorrow is my husband's birthday. You were talking about getting older, and I thought of that too. My mind just wanders into so many circles as Agustin's speaking. And so he's not going to be an old man tomorrow, but he is going to enjoy a birthday. And I understand that Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't celebrate birthdays. Is that true?
That's true, they don't. By the way, happy birthday, Dr.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to give these comments to my wife to read, but I'd like to ask you a question before she reads these comments that are coming in. The Jehovah's Witnesses really play upon the cognate form of the Tetragrammaton.
Right.
And my question is, why do they emphasize the cognate form rather than using a more rational approach towards the Tetragrammaton?
Well, what's funny is that whenever I have encountered Jehovah's Witnesses, I say, oddly, you hang your hat on a name that is not even an accurate translation of the Tetragrammaton.
Yeah, it's built off of superstition. It's built out of several different ideas of several words together. And I've asked this question a million times, and I thought you might know the answer, because, why use a cognate that's so poor and so foreign to the text as poor as this is, Jehovah, 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 and it's found throughout their English text. And so
what's funny is that, like I said, this is an area of cognitive dissonance where they can hold two opinions that conflict with one another and yet still hold them simultaneously.
Yeah.
They're aware that Jehovah is a transliteration and is not an accurate representation of the Tetragrammaton. And yet they'll herald themselves as the only ones who truly herald God's name. And then you point out, well, you don't really truly herald God's name because, let's say your name is Harold, right? And I would use this as an example. I was like, your name is Harold, right? And I was like, okay, yeah, your name's Harold. I said, what if I called you for the rest of this conversation Daryl? Now, it sounds close to Harold, but wouldn't you get annoyed?
That's
Daryl.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny you use the word Daryl.
I said, so what you've done to God is his name might possibly be Harold, but you said I successfully heralded God's name by calling him Daryl.
Good point, Agustin.
The entire idea of Jehovah was built out of actually three different terms, and it was built because of superstition. And so
Yeah.
I don't know why they would use the term, first of all, and build upon the premise of that. Number one, it's not technically transliteration in a good sense, is extremely poor transliteration. And number two, the pointing of it is nonsense. And so I was just curious as to why they would make it not just a term in their Bible, but this is what their movement is. It's the Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, that's extremely poor.
Yeah, well, I think because they've built so much time hanging their hat on that name, they can't. It would be a very, very difficult thing to take back their position. I mean, their whole organization is based upon that name, the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, they're consistent.
I think Bob Graves made a wonderful point tonight in his teaching just before our show, and he was talking about people are more interested in being biblicists or getting into bibliology than they are actually knowing who Christ is. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I said that. What's funny is even Jesus, and not to take away from Jehovah's Witnesses, there's been an argument against Jehovah's Witnesses. First of all, Jehovah's Witnesses say that if you read the Bible alone, that you'll just be led into Christendom's dark teachings within 2 years. But in defense of Jesus Christ, he told the Pharisees of his day that reading the scriptures is insufficient to get truth. He himself said that in John chapter 5, I believe it's verse 37 through 39, it says, "You search the scriptures, and yet you do not come to me." And so he himself was telling scripted scholars that the scriptures were inadequate for finding the truth about him, that you had to come directly to him. And so I think that this idea that this emphasis on, people have placed a lot of emphasis on the Bible and translating it. And I think Bob Greaves I read it, I saw a video of his, which he made a very, very good point about the indexical knowledge of the Bible is the language. And you yourself are, as a linguist, is that really when we come across trying to translate, first of all, Koine Greek or even Biblical Hebrew, we're doing pretty much a guessing game. And nothing comes across more than that than the Old Testament name Yahweh or the YHWH Tetragrammaton. We don't really know whether it was Yahweh or Yahweh or some other trisyllable or maybe it was trisyllable, maybe it wasn't. We just don't know. And our attempts to try to restore the divine name would just wind up being fallacious no matter what, because it's just a guessing game. And so I think you mentioned Dan Walls. Actually, I'm supposed to have him in January on my show. This idea that, for example, this argument about Trinity versus Unitarianism, both will argue for the Greek, and both will make their points. And I've come to realize that Unitarians have just as much a grievance as to what a word may mean in the Greek as a Trinitarian would say. and that no two can really assert their own meaning into any particular Greek word in a language that is not in use any longer. We're only making an assumption as to what that word means or what that language actually means. We're making pretty good assumptions based upon the language that exists now, Macedonian and Classical Greek, but it's still an assumption, and so we can't really have any real finality to say that this word means this. For example, the word gay, right in our society, gay just about 50 years ago only meant someone who was happy. And within 50 years now, gay means male or female that likes to have intercourse with other males and females, of the same sex. So here, within 50 years, a complete word has changed its linguistical context within a very short time.
It's true that we do have multiple problems when it comes to the manuscripts, all of the writings of Scripture. But yet at the same time, there are reconstruction processes that are underway, and we have been able to achieve some things, but we're far from being at the end mark. And at some point in time, we may get to the end mark, but that's highly suspect, to say the least. And so I applaud your statements about linguistics, because it's really a spurious thought to think that we can look, for instance, at an abjad and actually know what it means. And when you look at the Greek text, we have a much better model of a language that we could assess, but yet at the same time, since we fail to have indexical and deictic and deixis and etc., these things are very, very complicated. And the good thing is there are reconstruction models that are being put together. And so I would contend that we don't need to give up on understanding the text. I'm very much a person that believes that we need to keep fighting as hard as we can to understand the past, because if we can understand the past, we won't make the same mistakes. But I don't think that we need to use hyperbole. We don't need to exaggerate, what we don't have. We just need to admit to what we actually do have. And so at this current time, we have very little that we can actually comprehend and say with confidence that this is actually what something means. And since words do not have inherent meaning, they simply have usage. And so the idea is to look for usage, and words can mean 1,000 different things. It depends on the context, etc. And so I completely agree with you. And so let's move on. Why don't you read some of these comments?
All right. Viewer comment. I came out of the Baptist church, which I think it pretty fundamental, and I'm no longer a fan of the Baptist church. I walked away, but I've never in my life heard of an organization that strives to keep people uneducated like what Mr. Astacio was talking about. How could anyone spurn the very treasure that so many oppressed people have struggled, strived, and given even their very lives to obtain?
Yeah, it's sad.
It is. I mean, this viewer, and also I think
I'd like to make a comment on that.
Okay, would you want to do it now?
Yeah, but I want to listen to Agustin. Are you going to make any more comments on this?
Well, I was going to say that part of that is that the Watchtower Society, and they've done this, they've overextended themselves as far as their own literature. They've said, and this has been said off the platform, that if you got a subscription to the Awake magazine, a 2-year subscription to the Awake magazine is the equivalent of a master's degree in college.
No.
I think he said that. It wasn't a joke.
That's funny. That's funny. I mean, do you think one reason one reason they didn't want people to go on and get an education is because they really, really thought that the world would end in some kind of apocalyptic, fashion, and why
Right.
have this big, degree if you're not going to be able to use it?
Well, it's also that us versus them mentality. Once again, it's not only that the world is coming to an end, but that everyone outside of the organization is outside of God's organization. And so there's no value to anything outside of their community. And this is what I meant by they're about as close to being in a compound without actually being in a compound. That kind of mentality is compound mentality.
That's true.
Now,
Very
the
true.
thing that I wanted to add to the conversation concerning that comment, I'm thankful that the viewer made that comment. And let me speak about the Baptists for a moment and other denominations similar to it. We have received so many phone calls over the years from people going to school. And for instance, one out of Liberty University wanting to go into their seminary program could not go through their seminary program because they would not adhere to one particular doctrinal point, and that would be on the creational issue. And so that person called me and said, "Hey, Dr. Jones, what should I do? I want to go through this educational process here in this particular seminary." I said, number one, you're going to have to agree with him doctrinally in order to get your degree. If you do not agree with their doctrine, you will not receive a degree. And so it would be superfluous. It would be a waste of time. It would be a wasted argument to argue that the Baptist Church doesn't have something similar to the Watchtower Society. For instance, any Baptist theological seminary will not allow you to graduate if you hold to doctrines that are not in concert with the Baptist Church. And the same thing is true with the Pentecostals and others. And this is why this is such an important conversation. It's not just that the Jehovah's Witnesses are into these fixed beliefs, not allowing their students to get an objective education. It seems like almost every religious educational institution is simply offering parrot programs. In other words, you can graduate here if you parrot what we say, instead of offering good scope and sequence with various professors offering different ideas and a very good objective education. And this is something that is troubling not just in the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is why I'm applauding so much, and we are applauding so much of what Agustin is saying tonight. There are many traps, and I would warn everyone about theological education. I've got more books than you can count over to my left on linguistics. And the ones that are written for Baptist theological seminaries are some of the most disingenuous books on the market. And so when you put them side by side with this book that I have in my hand by the Watchtower Society, let me tell you something. The Baptists are putting out stuff that is just as illiterate as this.
So in the South, we say you can put it all in a bag and shake it up and pull one out, and it wouldn't be any different than the other.
No. I mean, you cannot go to any. I can name maybe 2 seminaries, but these are not considered seminaries in a technical sense by the Protestants and the Catholics, because these are secular schools. But you can't go to seminaries today and study Greek. You're going to study Sanskrit grammar. You're not studying Greek grammar. You're going to study things that are not even closely associated with what those people were speaking. Sure. And this has been the fundamental flaw. This is why we have a huge gap. We've had the church got rid of the language. Could you imagine that? The church actually took Koine Greek and threw it away. We lost the language because of the church. And then what we had to do is resurrect it and reconstruct it. And now we're during the reconstruction days of this particular language and its text, and we're having difficulties. But if you go to seminary A, B, or C, and let's be specific, a Baptist seminary, you're not going to get an objective education. And so it's not true that the Baptists are not being disingenuous about education. They're being very disingenuous.
Right, and that leads me to the next viewer comment, and this viewer wanted to make a distinction between the people and the organization. And the comment says, there's a difference between the loving people in an organization and the shallow, manipulative organizations that oppress their minds. And so we do want to, sometimes they're one and the same, let's be honest. People aren't perfect, and they can be, manipulating on and on. But for the most part, the people in an organization are almost like sheep led to the slaughter,
Right. Absolutely.
good intentions, loving, but caught up with something that is bigger than them, or so they think. And so that was a good viewer comment, that we want to make sure we differentiate between the people in an organization and the organization itself. And then another comment, Monica says, "Great show, Agustin. I applaud your stand on not labeling people according to their beliefs." So you have a fan there.
Yeah, I'll tell you, there's always something of value you can learn from anyone, from any other belief system. There's always something that you can learn from individuals of any belief system.
I believe that.
I'm not a throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of person.
Well, that's good. We have several schools here in town. We're proud of that. Unfortunately, we do have several Bible schools / seminaries here in town. And I say that because their language professors have come our way simply saying we can't teach what we think to be true because we have to stay within the guidelines of doctrine. Now, the ones who have made up the guidelines of doctrine are the ones who say what can be taught and what can't be, can and cannot be taught in the school. And so the kind of Greek and Hebrew that they teach has to fit the doctrine. And that's like, a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't work. But that's the way that people go through school today, thinking that they're really getting a legitimate education. And educators are getting tired of this. Educators are getting tired of working in theological institutions because they are very disingenuous.
I can tell you, Dr. Ronald Nash, who was a friend of mine, and he passed away a couple of years ago. He was the philosophy prof at Reformed Theological Seminary. And because he didn't believe in infant baptism, that's what made him wind up being at Southern Baptist Seminary. And he became the philosophy prof at Southern Baptist Seminary because he would not accept infant baptism. He was a cradle Baptist. So, when you go to a certain seminary, they have certain strict rules for, whatever their doctrinal faith statement incurs.
What can we do to encourage people to walk away from not just the Jehovah's Witnesses, but possibly all these different kinds of bias, simply to be objective? What is your best words on this?
I would say, the Bible itself tells you what you should do as a person. It tells you that you're to examine yourselves. And in 1 Thessalonians, I believe it's chapter 5, verse 17, says, to examine all things and hold fast to what is good. So I think that sometimes, particularly, any a Christian from any background, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, can be so close-minded as to not want to listen to another person's view and to demonize that person and their belief system without even ever examining what their belief system is, or trying to understand how they define terms, or why did they come to the conclusions that they have. And the fact is that this person that is standing, that's facing you, is a father, a mother, a daughter, a son, a brother, a husband, and they have value, and they've come to these conclusions or whatever belief system they're in because of what they've experienced in their life. Not because they want to be your enemy, not because they hate God or hate your version of God, but because this is what they've been exposed to. And so allow them to explain to you their story. And you might learn something from that story, and there might be something that you both can mutually share with one another's story, where you both can gather something that will bring you closer together. I'm one of the few countercult ministries that has Catholics and Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, on their program, because most of the countercult ministries for Jehovah's Witnesses are fundamentalist in nature. Because I've decided that I want to build bridges instead of barriers, and that we should be praying for communion with one another as Christians, as opposed to excommunicating one another as Christians.
Speak about your ideas concerning atheists, because you included atheists earlier. We love atheists. We
Sure,
applaud
absolutely.
them. We think that atheists and theists need to come together, look at the same evidence, and enjoy one another, love one another, and
Learn
just
from one another.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned so much from atheists here lately. I mean, wow, they are wonderful people. I'm not suggesting that all atheists are doing great things. I'm simply
Right.
suggesting people are people. We've got, people
Right.
doing good things and bad things. But wow, we have met some awesome atheists. For instance, Greg Bray, and then tonight we had Troy Roberts, and we're going to have him on our show. The guy is, wow, he is just so honest, incredibly intelligent, has so much to put on the table of discussion. And so what are your thoughts concerning atheists? What good are they doing today? I want you to brag about it, if you would.
All we have to do is look at the surveys. And atheists, according to a lot of the surveys that are being put out there, are doing more, they're charitable, they're loving, they care about people more. There's less atheists in prison population than there are Christians, that's for sure, or people that claim to be Christians.
It's true.
You got more people that claim to be Christians and Muslims in prison populations than you do that are atheists. And so, and these are stats that are brought up to me by atheists often, And so, I'm not saying that everyone who claims to be a Christian behaves as a Christian. Neither would I say that about atheists. We can't judge atheism based upon the conduct of some atheists.
Sure.
We have to judge people based as individuals, how they treat one another, how they treat fellow human beings. And so I have friends that are atheists. I had a great friend, great humanitarian, who was an agnostic. He passed away years ago here in the government, and did so much for so many people. And I loved him, and still love him, and cherish his memory. And so, I think that we need to really, stop with all the calling evil upon people just because they have a certain philosophy, and start reaching out to one another and dialoguing and trying to find out where we came to these conclusions. And maybe we can both help one another, whether there is, whether that involves an atheist recognizing that there is a God, or a theist recognizing that there isn't one. But I think
That's good.
I think that there's value in everything that anybody has to say and has to put on the table, and we all, like you said, we're on a journey. Life is a journey; it's not a sprint, and so we should just reach out to one another, build bridges.
You know, I think the other day when I heard you on Inspiring Honesty, I'm going to attribute this comment to you, Agustin. And I believe you said that we need to work toward unity instead of uniformity.
Right.
And that really resonated with me. We don't all have to be, cut from the same mold, but we do need to all come together and unite. And I thought that was, it sounded simplistic, but yet it's far-reaching. If that would ever happen, we could turn this world upside down. I know it.
Absolutely. There's an illustration I always associate with that, and that's snow. Each snowflake is distinct from one another. There is no two snowflakes alike. And yet, they all come down together in a pillow of whiteness. And so, even in our distinction, even in our differences, we can still come together as one pillow of whiteness and have some common basis to come together, just like snow.
That's wonderful. It's been wonderful having you on the show tonight. I can't applaud you any more than what we are. We're just really just in shock, in a sense, just to have you on our show, because we love you so much, and applaud that, you left a bad situation. You confessed to being on this journey. You're not stuck in your beliefs. You're still thinking and rethinking, encouraging other people to rethink, and not just embracing one particular group, but embracing people all the way across the spectrum. We can't applaud you any more than that. And
That's the beauty of that, honey. It's not that, he came out and, I'm saved, I'm better, and I'm going to go on with my life. But he wants to drag people, with him. He wants to empower other people to, share in that same freedom that he has now. And so, Agustin could have been very selfish and said, thank goodness I'm out now and I'm not going to look back. But, to go through the trial of, his faith, however you want to define that, to bring other people out and help other people. And if not, but just to be a sounding board and a counselor for them is very admirable.
So true. So true. Do you have any final thoughts, Agustin?
No, I just want to thank you for inviting me on the program, and it's been a pleasure.
I tell you, we've been blessed, and I hope that you will come back and be with us again. I'd like to go a little bit further because you are so interesting, so honest, and we thank you for coming to the place. And so if we have any viewers who might have a comment or whatever for Agustin, our show is over, but you can send in the comments and questions, and we will actually send them to him. And so I want you guys to have a good evening. And so let's just wrap it up right now.
All right. Happy birthday, baby.
Well, thank you, honey. I love you so much. Augustin, you have a good evening, okay?
All right. God bless everyone, and everyone, please pray for Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
We sure will.
May God bless.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.